So we look forward to just great matchups, great people here, and it's going to be a fantastic match tonight.
30 minutes. That's how long it took for a night session at the National Bank Open in Toronto to sell out completely. Not because of who Alex Eala was playing, not because of the round, but because of one single line on the order of play, her name, attached to a court. The grandstand. 2,800 seats. On paper, more than enough room for a player ranked in the low 20s in the world. Somewhere inside Tennis Canada's ticketing office, that assumption started falling apart in real time. Court assignments on the WTA Tour aren't guesswork. They run on ranking-based demand curves, a system built over years, refined at every stop on the calendar. Top 10 players get center court. The next tier fills the show courts. Players in the 20s, especially in early rounds, go to the secondary venues, courts like the grandstand, which by any normal tour standard is not small. It is not a system built out of carelessness. It is a system that, until this week, had never really been tested. By the time tournament director Carl Hale looked at the numbers, the grandstand wasn't just full. It had been blown past its own ceiling. Our grandstand court is 2,800 seats, he said. We can't put her on there because she probably sold upwards of 5,000 tickets. Not a soft overflow you manage with better queuing. A number that outran the room by nearly double. So Tennis Canada did something a WTA 1000 event almost never does for a player outside the top 5. They moved her up, off the show court, onto center court. 10,077 seats. Built for the very top of the sport. This is the story of how that happened. And it didn't happen overnight. To understand the shape of it, you have to understand exactly where Alex Eala stood the moment she walked into Toronto. She arrived ranked a career-high world number 20, the first Filipino, man or woman, ever to reach the top 20 of the WTA rankings, a number that had only become official days earlier, on August 4th. She arrived 5 days removed from Washington, D.C., where she had just won her first WTA singles title at the Mubadala DC Open, closing it out against world number 3 Jessica Pegula in a rain-delayed final that stretched across 2 days. She dropped the opening set. She won the next 2, 6-4, 6-0, having also survived a marathon opening set tiebreak against Iga Swiatek earlier in the week and beaten Alina Svitolina in the semifinal. It pushed her career prize money past $1.5 million. It made her, in the space of a single tournament, one of the most talked about players left on tour. None of that on its own explains a sold-out grandstand in half an hour. Because a ranking is a number the tour's model already accounts for. What it doesn't account for is a city. According to Statistics Canada's 2021 census, there are roughly 957,000 Filipino Canadians nationwide, the country's largest Asian ethnic group, with close to 272,000 of them concentrated in the Greater Toronto area alone. That number, Statistics Canada projects, could climb past 2 million within a generation. Toronto was never a neutral market for Alex Eala. It may be the closest thing to a second home crowd she has anywhere on the planet, and no scheduling algorithm built on ranking curves was ever going to see that coming until the tickets were already gone. Hale, to his credit, didn't sound defensive when he talked about it. He sounded like a man watching his own model get outrun by something it wasn't built to measure. We've never seen a player ranked outside the top 5 have this type of effect, he said, adding that he believed her fans had been watching the schedule closely, waiting specifically to find out when she'd take the court. Then he said something that pushed the story past Toronto entirely, that tournament directors up and down the tour were already talking about it. Which means Cincinnati, which starts the moment Toronto ends, is watching. So is the US Open. So is every remaining stop on the 2026 hardcourt swing, quietly running its own version of the same math. It's worth sitting with that for a second, because the story of Alex Eala this year has a strange shape to it. It keeps outrunning whatever description you attach to it a week earlier. 2 months ago, she was a promising quarter-finalist finding her footing on grass. 5 days ago, in Washington, she became a first-time WTA champion. This week in Toronto, she became the reason a WTA 1000 event rewrote its own showcourt schedule in the middle of the tournament. That isn't the arc of one lucky run. It's a pattern that has now repeated itself enough times, in enough cities, that it stopped being a coincidence a while ago. It showed up at the Australian Open in January, when her first-round match went viral for how loudly the crowd was behind her. It showed up at Indian Wells, where fans in Filipino flags lined up 6 hours before her match and stayed past midnight in the cold to watch her finish a 3-set win, a hand-painted Laban Alex sign, Tagalog for fight, sitting in the front row. It showed up in Dubai, where Coco Gauff, no stranger to a home crowd herself, thanked the Filipino fans in the stands afterward and thanked Eala directly for what she called bringing a new demographic into the sport. Tournament director Sulla Talik said much the same thing about that event, that Eala had drawn people to tennis who'd never shown up for it before, and that the stadium sold out for every match she played. In Washington, tournament director Mark Ein told reporters that for the better part of a month, the overwhelming majority of ticketing questions his staff fielded came down to one thing: when is Alex Eala playing? So when the grandstand sold out in 30 minutes in Toronto, it wasn't a surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention elsewhere on tour. It was the first time the surprise came with a hard number attached to it, a city where the math finally landed loud enough to force an actual court change, live, mid-tournament. But none of this works as a story if the tennis doesn't hold up its end. Results are what turn a fanbase into a phenomenon a tournament director has to reckon with, and Toronto gave this one a result worth the room. In the second round, Eala faced American Alicia Parks, the same player who had beaten her in the very first round of the Australian Open back in January, in a match where Eala won the opening set 6-0 and then lost the next two. That result had trailed her quietly for months, an unresolved thread stitched into an otherwise rising season, the kind of loss that doesn't disappear just because everything since has gone well. In Toronto, on the court the ticket demand had built for her, Eala beat Parks 6-1, 4-6, 6-2, dropping the second set, then answering immediately, breaking serve twice more in the decider to close it out. It moved her into the third round. It also quietly settled the score for Melbourne, not with any speech attached to it, just a result on paper, arriving in the exact building the moment had demanded. Afterward, in front of a crowd waving Philippine flags, Eala didn't talk about the court she'd been moved to, or the ticket numbers, or any of it. She talked about the people in the stands. She thanked her fellow Filipinos for showing up for her week after week, said she was proud, so proud to be Filipino, and thanked everyone who'd helped build an atmosphere like the one inside center court that night. It's a small detail, but it matters for the shape of this story. The player at the center of a scheduling crisis spent her post-match interview thanking the crowd that caused it. It's tempting, looking at one tournament, to treat all of this as a lucky overlap, a big city, a big diaspora, a big week, all colliding by coincidence. But the pattern runs back further than Toronto, and further than this season. Eala left the Philippines at 13 to train at Rafael Nadal's academy in Mallorca, on scholarship, after first learning the game on painted-over basketball courts in Quezon City. She became the first Filipino to win a junior Grand Slam title at the 2022 US Open, reaching as high as world number 2 in the junior rankings. She then spent close to 2 full seasons grinding through the ITF circuit, largely out of view, before a wild-card run at last year's Miami Open. Wins over Swiatek, Madison Keys, and Yelena Ostapenko along the way changed the shape of her career almost overnight. A few months later she became the first Filipino to win a Grand Slam main draw singles match, beating 14th seed Clara Tauson at the US Open, in front of a grandstand crowd near Queens neighborhood known locally as Little Manila. This past July at Wimbledon, she went further than any Filipino woman ever has at a major, upsetting defending champion IGA Swiatek in straight sets on center court. Between January and August of this year alone, her ranking climbed from the low 40s to world number 20. That is the resume the ticket demand in Toronto was actually responding to. Not a single viral moment, but more than a year of results stacking on top of each other, city by city, until the numbers stopped fitting inside a 2,800-seat room. Back home, the reaction has matched the scale of it. When Eala beat Pegula to win in Washington, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos publicly congratulated her and later hosted her at a reception at Malacanang Palace in Manila. Boxing legend Manny Pacquiao, for years the closest thing the country had to a global sporting superstar, called her the nation's new champion. Tennis clubs across the Philippines have reported courts fully booked for the first time in memory, with Eala herself noting at a press conference that when she was younger, those same courts sat empty. At the palace reception, she summed it up simply in Tagalog, Tagumpay nating lahat, this is our victory for all of us. There's a wider context here that the tour itself has been quietly circling for a while. Women's tennis has spent recent seasons searching for the kind of drawing power it lost with the retirement of stars like Serena Williams, investing in production, in broadcast, in narrative marketing. What no marketing plan can manufacture from scratch is a player from a country with almost no infrastructure for producing them, whose fan base is dense enough in the tour's biggest cities to physically move a ticket demand curve. Andy Roddick on his own podcast put it about as bluntly as anyone has, saying he's completely on board with the idea of watch parties filling arenas back home for a match as early as the 4th round. None of what comes next is guaranteed, and nobody around Eala seems to be treating it that way. From Toronto, she moves straight into a doubles match on center court alongside Venus Williams, against Ludmila Samsonova and Miyu Kato, a pairing that, on paper, has nothing to do with a ranking story unfolding around her singles run, but which will still be played in front of a room the tournament had to rebuild around her name. Cincinnati begins the moment Toronto ends, running from August 7th through 18. Then comes the US Open at the end of August, the first Grand Slam of her career where she walks in as a seeded player, rather than the player everyone in the building is still discovering in real time. That distinction matters more than it might sound. A seeded player is protected from the very top names in the earliest rounds. It's the tour zone way of saying a player has arrived on paper, at the level where the draw itself has to account for them. For most of this season, Eala has been the disruption, the floater in the bracket nobody wanted to face early, the player whose crowd showed up regardless of what the seeding sheet said about her. Flushing Meadows will be the first time the paperwork and the fanbase are finally saying the same thing at the same time. What happened at SWA Stadium this week was never really about a room being too small. It was the moment the gap between where Alex Eala's ranking says she stands and where her fans have already decided she stands became too wide to fit inside a 2,800-seat court. Every tournament left on this hardcourt swing knows it now. Cincinnati knows it. Flushing Meadows knows it. The only open question left is how big the next room has to be. If you want to see how that answer plays out, stay with us, because Toronto was only the preview.